Good morning everyone, welcome to day 164 in my M140. Mileage as of today, right now, is 17,015 miles. So today is day 164, this is part one. There is going to be a part two. Up ahead is my friend Reg and his 140 Shadow Edition with a few changes. Now his is an automatic, but he's got passive suspension. So after I've done this one, part two is going to follow a bit later on, where Reg is going to get to come out in this. Unfortunately, he's not insured, but he's never been in an active suspension 140 to see what he thinks about how this car feels in both of the damper settings. And then I'm getting to leather the hell out of that thing for an hour, which I'm really looking forward to. I've never been in a passive suspension 140, and this thing's got springs and spaces. Is that going to make that car feel like I hope this would feel at Goodwood? And speaking about Goodwood, I've come to realise something, and that is that this isn't an ST. And what do I mean by that? With Fords, I had the Fiesta ST, I had the Focus RS. The ST is kind of like the sub-performance brand, and it's still a very, very sorted car in terms of how it handles. The Mark 7 Fiesta ST is, still highly regarded as a fantastic little driver's car. Really connected, but it could soak up what you wanted from it on track. The RS, being the performance brand, just took that to another level. I bought this thinking it was kind of like BMW's ST, and I've realised that it's not. It doesn't translate on track to the sharpness. It feels great on the road, fantastic, but it doesn't translate into the sharpness and the ability that the Fiesta used to give me. I'd liken it more, actually, to a Z-Tech, a Fiesta Z-Tech or something. Yeah, it's got some sporty springs and dampers on it, but like I said, it's no M car. It doesn't have that, doesn't have the sense that it's been engineered in that way. It does have the sense that it's a 1 Series with an enormous engine in it. But yeah, I came into this, I wasn't expecting an M2. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more though. That's not to say that I'm going to start, crawling all over it and doing things to it like Reg has done to his car. I think on the road, it's perfect. I think on a track, it's not perfect, but it's got a short wheelbase, rear-wheel drive, nearly 360 horsepower and nearly 400 pounds-feet of torque going through the rear axle. That's a fun thing from whatever angle you look at it. So I have no intention of modifying this. Will I after driving that? We'll see. Maybe that is transformed. Reg certainly thinks it is and says that it's completely changed the way the car feels. So I'm really looking forward to that. That'll follow later. So what did I learn from driving this on track? Well, the first thing is the open diff. I don't really think has compromised the car at all. It has huge amounts of traction. Only when watching it back, I had the GoPro there, so I couldn't see the dials. I couldn't see the traction control light, but it was only when watching the video back that I could see how much the traction control, the ESP, whatever it was doing things as I went round. It was almost permanently on a lot of the time. These are fast corners, 80, 90 miles an hour, and the traction control light's blinking, but I didn't feel it. So it felt like it had a lot of traction, but it was doing something. It seemed to be spinning the inside wheel. Didn't really oversteer unless I provoked it in my hands. And in terms of how I got on the day, I agree with some of the comments that were left on the videos. I lacked a bit of focus. I wasn't really focused on what I was there doing. A couple of times I had passengers who I'd not taken out before, and I was waving my arms around and chatting and so on. I should have just got my head down and really worked at getting the car around the circuit. So noted, I won't be doing that next time. It's going to be more focus on getting some laps in. I didn't really drive any full laps. We'll talk about laps later because I've got lap time comparisons and back-to-back side-by-side videos. But I didn't really drive many laps where I had A, the circuit to myself, and B, I wasn't talking or playing around with something. So there weren't really any that were directly comparable, but I did find one. Another problem is that I went out there thinking this was a Focus RS. I started driving it like a Focus RS. I wanted that immediacy, that sharpness, that turn-in like the Focus RS. And that was a mistake. Doing that, driving the car like that, I had one full lap at best out of the brakes. But once I settled down, once I started thinking, okay, just drive what you've got, And once I started changing the way I was driving it, more about focusing more on the entry and getting the car set in a corner and then accelerating out of it. Once I'd realised that, and I was going a bit easier on the brakes and everything else, as a car, on circuit, even with the suspension and damper compromises, it was fantastic. So I mentioned the brakes went, the fluid went really, I think it was, because the pads and discs, they were still doing some work, but I couldn't get the pressure on the piston. The pedal went all mushy, went soft and long. So before I go out next time in May, at the end of April, I'm getting the fluid changed, and I'll probably stick some RBF 600 in there or something. That's going to happen when I get the diff fitted. That's happening a couple of weeks, well, a few weeks from now, 3 weeks I think. I will have the diff fitted. Can't wait for that. Can't wait to see how the car feels. The brake pads, they lasted okay. I reckon I used maybe a third at the most of the total pad material that they would have had from new. In terms of how much material I've used versus what's left on them, I think I've got plenty there. So I'll be going out next time, same discs and pads, but with some fresh fluid. And that will then, you know, iron out if it's the fluid that is the problem or whether I think I need to do something with the pads. What about tyre wear? The tyres. Now when they were new, I measured them before they were even fitted to the car, and they were 7.5mm pretty much across the full width of the tread. Measuring them today, and okay, I've done a couple of weeks of road mileage, which is about 300 road miles, but otherwise they've done a couple of weeks before, a couple of weeks after, and the track day. And I currently have 6.5mm on the fronts and 5.5mm on the rears. So the fronts have worn less than the rears. That's a first for me, having driven front wheel drive around Goodwood all my life up to this point, apart from the Focus RS, of course, which was four-wheel drive. I've never had rear tyres wear more than the front, and that's quite significant, a millimetre more. So it does look like I was using the rear axle properly then. But more interesting to me is the fact that they've worn evenly on both sides, both left and right. Normally, because the left side is the one that does the work at Goodwood, being a clockwise circuit, that tyre takes some punishment. That one doesn't really do anything. But it seems that this car is so well balanced that it's using the grip available and it's using the tyres on all four corners fairly evenly. Now, despite getting a slightly odd reading, I mentioned it in one of the track videos before I went out on track, despite getting an odd reading in terms of how many miles were left on the engine oil before it needed a change, doesn't really seem to have suffered. It's settled now, and it now says I've got 15,000 miles available. Where was I? Oh yeah, 15,000 miles left on the oil. So that doesn't seem to have reflected the fact that it was leathered on track for half a day. And miles to the gallon, how much fuel did I use? Well, I managed to do 80 miles from arrival at the circuit until the point that I parked up and took my helmet off at the end of the day. 80 miles, including, you know, the slower out laps, the slower in laps, and trundling around the paddock, and I averaged just over 9 miles to the gallon. That's quite remarkable. As I mentioned in a previous video, the Focus RS in similar situation did 6. Now on to the juicy bit, the lap times that that I managed to do in this thing. Not strictly comparable with the Focus. It was my first time out in the Focus, it was my first time out in this, but I'd done 16,000 road miles in the Focus and I had a lot more time to get used to it, and it does kind of, you know, wrap the driver in cotton wool with the four-wheel drive. You don't need to be that cautious, you can just chuck it in and stamp on the throttle. This, you know, I had to kind of tiptoe along a bit, so I think the lap time reflects that. Plus, of course, I'd only done 6,000 road miles and I was a bit nervous of a short wheelbase rear-wheel drive car with 360 horsepower. So here follows some back-to-back, side-by-side video comparisons of the lap times, and the results are, I think, quite surprising. So to recap, BMW's done 16,000 miles, I've done 6,000 of those. It's on brand new Michelin PS4 tyres, and otherwise it's completely standard. So I got a good exit out of there, and thankfully the 911 moved aside. Still not 100% confident through here, so bit of a lift on the way in there. Okay, it wasn't quite flat. And then it was really quite unstable up to this point, so I had to kind of ease off and get on the brakes gently and early. lots of needles and buds from the trees on the outside there, so that needed some caution. It's quite loose through here. And into Leven, pretty much everything I've ever had going in here is oversteered. But got a good exit. Thankfully this old 911 moved to one side as well, so I could keep on it all the way. But I'm really early on the brakes here, before the 200 metre board, and I missed a gear. It's quite soft on the way through here, and this was pretty much the fastest I went through the chicane the entire day, just over 40. Most of the time it was below that, but I had a good run up to the start finish line. You've been sat for about an hour now watching, and that's a lap in the M140. It looks very serene, doesn't it, with there through the chicane, and it just moves. So here's the Focus. This had done, I think, 16,000 miles. It was on the factory tyres and brakes. I'd done 10,000 more miles in this on the road than I had in the BMW, and this was my 7th session in the BMW. It was the 3rd session. Is he seeing me? Yes. Always flat through here, Dave. Look, it's not that much of a corner.
I must admit,
going through here flat was no problem at all in the RS. Really, really stable, so you could stay on it all the way up to the braking, really late and hard. You probably need to and over 90 mile an hour turning in there. That is so much faster than the 140.
The funny thing is
How is that? How can you do that in a Focus? So again, a good exit, but nothing in the way, so flat out all the way down.
In the Mini as it did in the Porsche.
Oh really?
Whereas the Mini, I couldn't have got any more out of it. The Porsche I could have got.
Watch how late I am on the brakes here. 150 compared to before the 200 in the 140. I haven't had one hint of brake fade all day.
I was going to ask you.
The speed through there as well, so much faster tn the 140.
Left the factory.
Which is mightily impressive, because you haven't exactly been A, pootling about, and B, giving it much between sessions.
No.
And across the line.
Which makes you wonder why.
So how does that compare lap time wise? Well, here are the two side by side.
Okay, and it just moves the back of the car.
It's more
So the start of the lap for both cars. Thing to note, look how fast the BMW is going.
like a four-wheel drive BMW than a Golf, which is like a Audi. That's a bit more fun.
So the 140 is about a length ahead at this point. The Focus is on the power much earlier though, and by the exit, it's ahead.
Yeah, good man. Always flat through here, Dave. Look.
The BMW reels the Focus back in, neck and neck at this point.
It's not that much of a
I must admit, I think I probably am, to be honest. I was one corner ahead of myself.
Lifting off the throttle in the 140 on the way in there has dropped it back about a car length.
Even if we're saying today, in faster cars, you'll probably need
Later braking in the RS has stretched out the gap a little.
to
I think
give
I've
it a
almost
lift, and I
flat
was
through
thinking,
there,
am
and
I
then
going to need to?
I changed down
And it's just romping away now.
through there.
Yep, four-wheel drive around St Mary's, that'll do it.
The funny thing is,
How is that? How can you do that in a Focus?
that's brilliant.
By the exit, that's 8 car lengths, maybe even 10.
Yeah, I actually did the same lap time in the Mini as I did in the Porsche.
Oh really?
Whereas the Mini, I couldn't have got any more out of it. The Porsche, I could have got a lot out of it.
By the 150 board, the 140 is right back with the Focus again.
I haven't had one hint of brake fade all day.
Later and stronger braking into Woodcote in the RS has given it a couple of car lengths though.
I was going to ask you actually, because it's all totally standard still, isn't it?
Absolutely, as it left the factory.
which is mightily impressive because
And by the chicane, the RS looks to have this in the bag.
you haven't exactly been A, pootling about, and B, giving it much between sessions.
No. So you've been sat.
Which makes
And the lap time? Well, that's irrelevant really. What I'm looking for is the difference between the two. I don't have timing equipment. I didn't data log this. But what I did was
you wonder why
About an
people
hour
insist
now.
on
measure the length of that piece of film there. And it was 1 second and 15 frames. So 1.5 seconds over a full lap. This is worth noting though. Both cars here, almost the exact same position on track. Both full throttle at 66 miles an hour.
Is that? How can you do that with focus?
That's brilliant. Yeah, I actually did the same lap time in the Mini as I did in the Porsche.
Oh, really?
Whereas the Mini I couldn't have got any more out of it, the Porsche I could have got a lot out of it.
I hope you enjoyed this, found it useful. Please leave any comments below the video. I do read every single comment, I can guarantee you that, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. Don't forget to subscribe. I've got a lot more coming, especially with the fitting of the diff that's happening. Oh, see you, Reg. Especially with the diff that's being fitted at the end of this month. I'll have some road impressions and then taking it back to Goodwood. So yeah, hit the subscribe button and I'll see you all in my next video, which will be driving that thing there.